Welcome to the Deep Dive.
Great to be diving in.
Today, we're looking at a collection of posts from X, the platform formerly known as Twitter, specifically from June 14th and 15th, 2025. These are snippets from a show called Daily Vibecasting.
Right, and it's a really interesting mix we've got here. 7 posts in total. We're going to be jumping from, geopolitics, global affairs, all the way to, huge media productions, market trends, policy shifts, even some cultural observations. It's quite the range.
Exactly. And our goal here is to unpack these specific trending posts. We'll use the source material provided to understand the context behind them.
Yeah, figure out what key insights, maybe some surprising facts we can pull out about what was really buzzing online during that short period.
Think of it like a shortcut, maybe, to getting the pulse of the day, but with the backstory filled in.
We'll go through them one by one, highlight the key info from the sources, and hopefully give you a well-rounded picture.
Should be interesting. Okay, let's unpack this. First up, we have a post from a pretty major global figure at Pontifex. That's Pope Leo XIV.
That's right. The first U.S.-born pope, which is notable in itself, elected, May 2025? And he has this background doing missionary work in Peru.
Okay, so his post reads, "The situation in Iran and Israel has deteriorated drastically. I renew my appeal to responsibility and reason. The commitment to build a safer world, free from nuclear threats, must be pursued through mutual respect and sincere dialogue in order to build lasting peace founded on." And it kind of gets cut off there. It feels very direct, especially given the timing.
It really is. The source material connects this directly to rising tensions after Israeli airstrikes on Iranian nuclear sites. That happened June 13th, the day before the Pope's post. And those strikes reportedly killed top commanders. So this isn't just a general, let's all get along message. It's very specific to that crisis moment.
And that mention of nuclear threats. The sources had some interesting layers there.
They absolutely do. There was an IAEA, that's the International Atomic Energy Agency report, out in June 2025. It confirmed Iran was enriching uranium up to 60%.
Okay, which is high, but still below weapons grade, right?
Exactly, below the threshold. But crucially, that same IAEA report pointed out that Israel hasn't signed the Non-Proliferation Treaty and doesn't allow inspections of its own facilities.
Right, so you've got one country enriching under international scrutiny, to a point, and another with a presumed but undeclared and uninspected nuclear capability.
Precisely. The source even mentions historical estimates suggesting Israel might have anywhere from 75 to 400 nuclear warheads.
Wow.
So when Pope Leo XIV calls for mutual respect and dialogue about nuclear threats in that specific context, it reads less like a general peace plea and maybe more like a subtle challenge to the narrative that focuses only on Iran as the nuclear risk in that region.
So why does this matter to you, listening? Is seeing how global leaders' brief message can carry a lot of geopolitical weight, drawing on these complex, often underreported details about nuclear programs and treaties. Kind of pushes you to look deeper, right?
Definitely.
Okay, shifting gears pretty dramatically now. From the Vatican to YouTube megastardom. Our next post is from @MrBeast.
Yes, MrBeast. Hard to miss him online.
His post gives some stats for his next video, and they are, listen to this. 400-plus days from set build to final edit, 171 days of filming 11,000 hours of footage, $4 million plus spent.
Whoa.
And then he adds, if you guys don't like my next YouTube video, I'll cry. Those first numbers, though, just staggering.
They really are. The source material puts that $4 million figure in perspective. It actually beats his previous record, which was the $3.5 million he spent on that huge Squid Game recreation video.
Which got insane views, didn't it?
Oh, yeah, something like 271 million views. So this is him doubling down, escalating the production scale even further.
$4 million for one YouTube video. That's a movie money.
It absolutely is. And the 11,000 hours of footage, YouTube gets something like 500 hours uploaded every minute globally.
Right.
But having 11,000 hours of raw material for a single video, that's an extreme outlier. The sources suggest it points to this incredibly detailed, probably very data-driven production process. Maybe using his own view stats tools, the context hints.
Yeah, that totally flips the script on the idea that viral hits are just, quick, low-effort things.
Fundamentally challenges it. And that last line about crying, it's relatable, but the source links it to studies on career burnout. Pew Research did work on this in 2023.
Interesting.
It kind of highlights the immense pressure, Even for someone that successful with that huge audience, there's this constant need for approval for the next video to hit. It's a very human element.
Especially considering his other work, like the philanthropy mentioned, Millions for Trees, helping people medically.
Exactly. It shows the person behind the massive operation.
So for you, this is a peek behind the curtain at the absolute highest level of content creation, the insane resources, the strategy, maybe even the data, but also the very real human pressure that comes with it.
Yeah, it's quite a snapshot.
All right, let's pivot again, this time to policy news, reported by @UnusualWhales.
Right, an account often focused on financial and market data, but sometimes policy too.
They posted, breaking. Trump pauses immigration arrests at farms, hotels, and restaurants, per WSJ. Seems like a significant move.
It definitely sounds like one. The source context, which cites the Wall Street Journal report, gives the reasoning. It seems this pause in ICE arrests isn't necessarily an ideological shift, but more of a pragmatic one.
Pragmatic how?
Driven by economics, basically. Protecting industries that are heavily reliant on immigrant labor from the disruption caused by enforcement actions.
And the sources quantify that reliance.
They do. Context mentions figures from the U.S. Agriculture Department. Something like 42% of crop farm workers apparently lack legal status.
42%. Wow.
Yeah. And this Center for Migration Studies data cited puts the total number of undocumented workers nationally around 8.3 million, with about 320,000 just in agriculture. These aren't small numbers.
So this pause isn't arbitrary. It's directly tied to labor needs in pretty crucial sectors.
That's what the source suggests. And what's really interesting is how this economic reality kind of bumps up against some of the earlier campaign rhetoric, which often focused on, mass deportations.
Right, create attention there.
Exactly. The sources mention this causes friction with some supporters expecting broader action. You see that reflected in things like protests. Los Angeles was mentioned as an example in the source material.
It really shows that clash between political promises and, well, economic facts on the ground.
It does. And the source reinforces that economic need. The hotel industry, for example, facing over 1 million job vacancies. The H-2A visa program for temporary farm workers apparently struggling to meet demand, according to a 2024 survey from the AHLA.
AHLA being?
The American Hotel and Lodging Association. So it really complicates the feasibility of just removing large numbers of workers without causing major labor shortages in these key areas.
So why track this? It's a really clear example of how economic realities can shape policy, sometimes in ways that seem to contradict political messaging. And it highlights just how interwoven immigrant labor is with certain parts of the economy.
A complex picture, for sure.
Okay, next up, we have a post from an official source at White House.
The official channel for the administration.
Very simple post. Commander-in-Chief win. And it implies there's an image or video attached showing Donald Trump at a military parade. Seems like standard patriotic messaging.
It does. And the source context confirms the timing. This was June 15th, 2025. That date marked the 250th anniversary of the U.S. Army. And coincidentally, it was also President Trump's 79th birthday. So a day with multiple layers of significance.
Makes sense. But the parade itself,
yeah.
Sources mentioned it generated some discussion.
It did. Beyond the official post, the context notes a planned budget of around $45 million, which is substantial. And there's criticism, reported by the AP just before the event, about potential damage to city streets from heavy military vehicles, like tanks.
Okay, budget and logistics concerns. What about the event itself?
Well, the turnout became a point of contention. The official White House post, as you said, likely focused on the president.
Right, not necessarily wide crowd shots.
Exactly. And the sources mentioned claims that the actual attendance was maybe more modest than projections. Estimates mentioned are around 30,000 to 40,000 people.
Compared to?
Compared to a planned figure or expectation mentioned in the source of 250,000. So a pretty big gap, which naturally fueled debate about the event's scale and success.
Getting objective numbers is hard, right?
It is. The context reminds us the National Park Service stopped providing official crowd estimates for political events back in 2017. That lack of official data really allows these competing narratives about crowd size to take root.
So the official post projects strength and patriotism, but the surrounding context is filled with debates about cost, logistics, and actual attendance.
Pretty much. And digging a bit deeper, the source mentions research like a 2023 study in the Journal of Political Marketing, suggesting these kinds of parades can give leaders an approval bump, maybe 5–10% just from the patriotic symbolism.
Okay.
But on the flip side, the sources also note counter-protest happening the same day these No Kings rallies. That signals a really polarized public reaction, which kind of mirrors Trump's approval rating cited in the context around 48% in a recent Gallup poll.
So what's the takeaway here? It shows how official channels use these national moments for messaging, how public events can spark debate on everything from cost to turnout, and how differently segments of the public react to the same display of national symbolism.
It's a snapshot of political communication in a divided time.
And speaking of divided reactions and competing narratives, the very next post we have is from @ProjectLincoln.
The Lincoln Project, yeah. Known for their consistent opposition to Trump.
Their post seems designed as a direct response. It says, Trump Parade versus No Kings March, San Diego, and implies there are side-by-side images. The suggestion seems to be the No Kings March had a much larger crowd.
Right. It's clearly setting up a visual contrast, a counter-narrative to the official parade imagery.
And the source suggests this is a deliberate tactic.
It does. The context mentions a 2023 study from the American Political Science Review, which found that visual evidence, like crowd photos, can actually shift public perception of a movement's strength by up to 15%. So using images like this is likely a calculated move by the Lincoln Project to shape how people see the balance of support versus opposition.
Tell me more about the No Kings March itself.
According to the source, it happened at Waterfront Park in San Diego, June 14th. It's framed as part of a growing anti-authoritarian sentiment. And the timing, right around the president's birthday and the military parade, seems intentionally chosen to provide that direct contrast.
And this plays into the whole issue of crowd size estimates being unreliable.
Exactly. As we just discussed, with no official NPS numbers for political events, it creates space for these kinds of visual arguments and disputes over whose crowd was bigger or more representative. It becomes a battle of images and claims.
So this post isn't just commentary, it's actively participating in trying to shape the perception of the events.
That's a good way to put it. The source material even links this to past controversies over crowd size claims associated with Trump. It mentions an event in Pickens, South Carolina in 2023, where Newsweek apparently debunked some very high attendance figures that were being circulated.
Suggesting a pattern, perhaps.
Suggesting at least a recurring theme of disputed attendance claims, and groups like the Lincoln Project positioning themselves to actively challenge the narratives coming from the administration or its supporters, often using visual contrasts.
What this really shows you then is the active fight over political perception. How images, crowd sizes, real or claimed, become weapons in that fight. It highlights the role of opposition groups in pushing back and how slippery narratives can be in our digital media landscape.
Yeah, it's perception warfare, in a way.
Okay, let's cleanse the palate completely. Something totally different now from @LevelCO.
Levels.io, yeah. Often posts about tech, travel, indie hacking.
This one is simple. Anyone have some pics they took of the hospital food menu? Seems like a very mundane, almost random question.
It does seem that way on the surface. But the source context says it actually came out of a broader online chat about how notoriously bad food can be in certain situations, specifically mentioning airline food and, yes, hospital food.
Ah, okay. Tapping into a common gripe.
Exactly. But the responses that came back, according to the source, revealed something pretty surprising.
Not just universally bad, then.
Not at all. The source highlights this stark contrast globally. Apparently, in Germany, if you have private health insurance, you might get served things like steak with asparagus.
Wait, seriously, steak in a hospital?
That's what the source says, which is, miles away from the more basic stuff. Hungarian goulash or simple pasta dishes were mentioned as examples that might be typical under the public system, which covers most people there.
Wow. That completely demolishes the stereotype of universally terrible hospital food.
It really does, at least for some patients and some systems. The source material challenges that universal assumption. It suggests things like the healthcare funding model specifically, the presence of private insurance options, which Germany introduced way back in 1949 along with cultural food norms, can lead to vastly different standards.
Interesting. Any other insights?
Well, the source also references a study from 2023 that did identify low menu variety as a general quality issue in hospitals. But the key point from the user responses seems to be that quality itself can vary dramatically. And there's even a mention that patient consumption data suggests better outcomes when meals are more appealing and tailored. So it's not just about taste, potentially.
So why should you care about hospital menus? It's fascinating how this simple query opens up this unexpected window onto huge systemic differences. Healthcare funding, insurance models, cultural expectations, all reflected in something as basic as a meal tray.
Shows how the big picture impacts the small details of experience.
Right. Okay, our final post for this deep dive. This one's from @BillAckman.
Bill Ackman, the hedge fund manager, CEO of Pershing Square, known for being pretty outspoken.
And this post is definitely that. It's about Iran. Iran will soon be able to take their country back. The time has come. That's a very bold statement, a prediction, really.
It is very assertive. The source material connects this kind of sentiment to certain threads in U.S. foreign policy history. For example, the maximum pressure campaign against Iran back in 2018 under the previous Trump administration.
Right, which aimed to weaken the regime.
Exactly, citing things like human rights issues and support for terrorism, according to U.S. State Department reasoning from 2020. So the idea of regime change isn't new in these discussions.
And does the source suggest any connection to sentiment within Iran?
It does mention that Ackman's posts seem to echo something recently said by an Iranian civil engineer on X. This suggests there might be, at least some element within Iranian society that desires change and might align with that kind of external statement. The context also brings up a 2019 poll from Iran Poll. It found, interestingly, that while a huge majority, 86%, had unfavorable views of the U.S. government, there was also some indication of potential openness to Western influence if the current political oppression ended. So it paints a complex internal picture.
Definitely sounds complex. Not a simple everyone wants X situation.
Not at all. And this is where the source material adds crucial cautionary context. It brings up the example of Afghanistan in 2021.
The Taliban's rapid return after the U.S. withdrawal.
Precisely. A stark reminder of how external predictions about regime stability or collapse can be dramatically wrong. The source also cites a 2022 RAND Corporation study, which basically concluded that external interventions or pressure tactics often fail to produce lasting internal change unless there's very strong, sustained, broad support within the country itself.
So making bold predictions about another country's internal politics is risky, to say the least.
History suggests it's incredibly difficult, yeah. External actors often misread the internal dynamics or overestimate their own influence.
So what's the takeaway here? You see a prominent figure making a strong geopolitical statement, perhaps reflecting historical policy aims, or picking up on certain internal sentiments. But the crucial context from history and research reminds us just how complex and unpredictable these situations are, and how often confident predictions about regime change don't pan out.
It's a reality check on punditry versus complex reality.
Okay, so that wraps up our journey through these 7 trending X posts, courtesy those daily Vibecasting excerpts.
Yeah, quite a ride. We went from the Pope on Iran-Israel tensions
to MrBeast's mind-boggling production budget and the pressure behind it.
A pragmatic shift in U.S. immigration enforcement driven by labor needs.
The whole debate around the military parade, the crowds, the counter-protests.
Then that surprising look at gourmet hospital food in Germany versus elsewhere.
And finally, Bill Ackman's bold prediction about Iran's future, placed against historical context.
And by digging into the source material for each, you hopefully get more than just the surface tweet. You see the layers, the context, the data, the history, the competing viewpoints.
It's about getting that deeper sense of what was actually driving the conversation, the dynamics at play beneath the trending topics.
It really shows how these little on-late moments can connect to much bigger systems and debates.
So maybe a final thought to leave you with. As you scroll through whatever's trending today, think about how these seemingly disconnected pieces, a global leader's words, a creator's stats, a policy tweak, visual political battles, everyday quality of life differences, geopolitical predictions, how do they all kind of collectively mirror the big currents shaping our world? The anxieties, the economic pressures, the clashing perspectives.
It encourages you to keep asking questions, right? To always look for the context behind the buzz.